It is such a great honor and a privilege to be with Lionel Stein here in Johannesburg, in South Africa. And Lionel is going to share with us his memories of his first 50 years. So Lionel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Now, I was born starting off in 1944. The first 50 years is going to take us up to 1994. My first memory that I have of anything in life was 1947 when the royal family came to Petersburg. I was born in Petersburg, and I'll never forget it. I mean, I was all of maybe 3 years of age at the time, but I still have such a clear memory of what the main street of the town looked like, and the excitement and the buzz and everything else that went on. The main street of the town then was Landros Marais Street, and I can still remember so clearly outside the Goldfields Hotel in the street. The Goldfields Hotel was then owned by Manny and Elaine Kaplan. Children were Herman and Doreen, and I just remember all the stands and all the lights and everything that sort of went with it. The street was just something absolutely unbelievable. I can't say that I can remember seeing the royal family, but I certainly remember the event.
And you were only 3 years old?
Yeah, I've got such a clear memory of that. An offshoot of that story was it was in the early 50s. Dr. Janssen was then the Governor General of South Africa, and he came to visit Petersburg. And if I remember correctly, in those days he used to travel in what was called the White Train. And there was a lot of fanfare and everything about his visit to the town, and a lot of excitement. And quietly, just outside Petersburg is the Zion Christian Church, ZCC. And Bishop Lachanyani, the bishop of the Zion Christian Church, very wealthy. I mean, through the church, I mean, they literally made tens and tens of millions of rand. Anyhow, suddenly there was a big buzz in the town also at that day, because everybody thought that the Governor General was in one of the side streets sitting in the back of his car, because it was the Rolls Royce that the royal family used when they came to South Africa, and the Bishop Lachanyani had bought it, and he was sitting there, none other than Bishop Lachanyani, and everybody went expecting to see the Governor General, and it had a bit of a surprise. But that was an apart story. So that was my first memory that I have of anything. Another very clear memory I have is a couple of years later, 1949, first year Yom Ha'atzmaut, and I'll never forget it. It was in the town hall on the stage in Petersburg, and to me, I was too young to appreciate or understand it at the time, because there was no action there. I was standing on the stage with a spade in my hand, my foot on the spade, and there'd all sand and everything around it, and I was part of one of the kibbutz workers.
And you were only 5 years old?
5 years old. No, that I remember so clearly. I mean, there was such excitement. Obviously, it was a very Zionistic town, and everybody, I mean, there was never ever a function where we didn't sing Hatikva. I mean, it just went without saying that if the community ever got together, it was always Hatikva was always sung. So that was also a very, very clear memory that I have. After that, must have been 6 or 7, so it would have been 51. We had an Air Force base in Petersburg from the Second World War, and my father bought an old aeroplane from the Air Force. He had just one condition: he had to sign an undertaking never to restore it to fly again. It was a trooper carrier and trainer. It was I can't remember the exact name. It was an Oxford, whatever it was. Anyhow, I remember the excitement. We had to tear down. We had a corner stand. We had to tear down the one fence to get the plane in, and that became, for the rest of my childhood, that was the hallmark of our backyard. I mean, not many people can claim that they had an aeroplane in their backyard.
And you used to play.
We used to play, more than playing it. I mean, we did everything there. And in fact, we'd love to do nothing more than to go and smoke cigarettes in the evening as well. Good old days of Cavella and C2C and Flagstaff, names that I don't think will mean anything to anybody. Westminster 85.
Wow.
You know, we really, whatever money we could steal or whatever we could get our hands on was to go to cigarettes.
And Lionel, is the stand still there? Is the house still there and the plate still there?
No. What happened was, basically when we sold the house, my father sold the plane. We made one big mistake though. We should have kept the propellers, because they could have made a beautiful clock, or could have turned it into something, you know, very meaningful. But you know, you don't think of those things. But I'll tell you, one of the people that used to come every day to play in the plane was Scully Levine. I don't know if you've heard of Scully. That's somebody else that you can interview as well. Scully is probably the leading, well, certainly the leading pilot in South Africa. He was also the South African aerobatics champion and a character in every right. And Scully used to come every day, and he used to play on the afternoon, and he was always Douglas Bader. Yeah, his greatest ambition was to become a pilot.
So maybe his interest in flying and with the airplanes, it was nurtured from coming to...
Well, it also came from his father. His father was also a pilot, and also a Michigan pilot. He was notorious for doing things that nobody else would do.
I'm sure he must know Smokey Simon.
I don't know smoking myself, but I'm sure anybody, let's put it this way, everybody in the flying world internationally knows Scully. He became very famous when he landed a plane on a moving truck. He then did the same on a moving boat on the Vaal River.
Wow.
And you know, that's him. I mean, he'll do them. Possibly he's got stories to tell that I wouldn't even try to emulate, because to tell you to spoil them. But we'll definitely arrange for you to do a session with him. So that was another great memory, sort of growing up. As if I ever did grow up, but those were very, very good years. You know, the type of thing that we did in those days was, I mean, living in the country. I mean, wherever we would go would be by bike. And I mean, it would be nothing for us to go for a 10-mile ride out to Sand River on a Sunday, just to go and have a smoke and then come back. You know, those are the type of things that we did. I mean, just the thought of it today, and thinking, you know, would I allow my children to do that? Definitely not.
Mm.
But I suppose it was a different world we lived in those days. And
your parents allowed you? There was no fear?
Absolutely no fear, no problems at all. It was a very free living society, and we had a lot of anti-Semitism. We were, you know, obviously, and also being in a predominantly Afrikaans town, we had the double-edged sword of both anti-Semitism and anti-English. So at the same time as being the bloody Ute, we were also the Roinek. But we survived it, and I think if anything, it probably helped us to survive. So those are just a few memories from my very early years. I'll kind of fast forward a bit to university, where I was the electoral officer at WITS. I had that position for 3 years. I was going to go into politics at the time, and I think I mentioned that in my last talk, that I learned one thing from that position, was that the left was as bad as the right, and the right was as bad as the left. And after that, I just hit politics as a hobby, but I certainly enjoyed it at all times. I really had a great time, whatever I did there, and I had some very memorable moments. One or two which I'll just mention briefly. The one happened, both were around the same issue. I Wits had a referendum whether to remain affiliated to NUSAS or not. And it was a very heated and contentious...
So for our listeners, NUSAS was...
the National Union of South African Students. It was a very liberal organisation, and it was very... and the government of the day was very much against it.
It was very anti-government.
Yeah, completely anti-government. And anyhow, so going to have this referendum. And the day before the referendum, they were arranged in the Great Hall that there was going to be a debate. And there'll be people speaking for it and against it. Wonderful. The morning I get to university, all is fine. A couple of hours before it takes place, I suddenly get approached by the SRC to be told, look, by the way, you'll be chairing that debate.
Now the SRC is the Student Representative Council.
Yeah. And
wow.
I mean, I looked at them and said, what do you mean? They said, no, all you've got to do is just give me one instruction. There's going to be a lot of rowdyism. There's going to be people trying to break it up and cause chaos. Just keep order. That's all you must do. And that's where I learned the importance of being able to, the use of a microphone and the strength of a microphone. And that day I had people on the...
Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to do this remote. Mr. Alex says they want to drop something.
Okay, just to tell him I'm busy at the moment.
Okay.
I'll tell him I can't talk now.
Okay.
But let me just, sorry, just give me, pass me this here.
How are you, Sam?
Hello.
I'm good, and you?
We're continuing with our very honoured guest, Lionel Stein. And Lionel, you were at Wits University.
That's right, yes.
What year did you enroll at Wits?
Well, at Wits, I didn't go straight to university. I was first at the Prudential, where I was in the actuarial department until I came to my senses that actuarial science wasn't for me. And then I eventually got to Wits in '66. In fact, I got to Wits, I was actually going to go after I finished at the Prudential. I thought I'd go and live in Hong Kong.
Wow.
And then my family convinced me, first go to university, then go to Hong Kong. Well, to be honest, I've never been to the East.
Why did you want to go to Hong Kong?
I don't know, it just fascinated me. I saw such opportunities that must exist there, and it just sounded exciting for me. So I never ever ended up in Hong Kong.
Well, it was South Africa's game that you stayed here.
So anyhow, so I got to Wits, and first few months, I must be honest, I was a very studious student, but it was towards, in fact, it was the middle of the year when I was approached to be, if I'd like to be take on the position of the electoral officer for at Wits, and without thinking, I accepted it. If I would have realised what was involved, I might not have accepted it. But to me, it sounded, it really sort of seemed to fill all the boxes that I wanted to tick. And I must say I did fill all those boxes, because I learned so much in terms of politics that I was so keen and wanted to go into. But because of my experience in that position, I learned that the left was as bad as the right was as bad as the left, and decided to keep out of politics for all time.
How old were you at this time?
I kept politics as I've always kept it as a hobby. At the time I was 21, and I must say that I enjoyed every moment of those days. So what happened, one of my memorable stories, being the electoral officer, was that we had a referendum for whether Wits would remain affiliated to the National Union of South African Students, NUSAS, who at the time were a body that was completely anti-government, and there was tremendous friction between government and NUSAS at all levels, and in fact not only at all levels, at all times as well.
So Lionel, can I just mention here to our viewers that Wits has a distinction. I think Wits and UCT has been the two universities that was totally multiracial, that it had black students, Indian students, coloured students, that they were admitted. I don't know if you had any in your class, any non-white students.
No, we didn't have in that class, but I was friendly with a lot of the
But
students.
they were allowed to,
Yes,
to
yeah.
come to WITS. And WITS on a whole, the government saw as, it wasn't pro-government. I'd say the majority of the students at WITS were more on the left-leaning. It was much more liberal, much more liberal.
And
But you did have right-wing as well. You had a combination of both.
Yes, it was interesting. You could almost divide it. The engineering department was right wing. The rest of the university was left wing.
I think it's so true. It's
And that's
even
exactly
in our days.
exactly how it was divided. In fact, I'll
Yeah.
mention another story after this particular story that just illustrated that point clearly. And that was coming back to this story. So we were having the referendum, and the day before the referendum, they'd organised a public debate in the Great Hall, and that was very well advertised, and it was on the morning of the debate, I was suddenly got approached by the SRC to be told that they wanted me to chair the meeting. And I mean, I didn't know, if I would have known what was involved in chairing that meeting, I would have run a mile again. But I accepted, and they said, look, just one thing, it's going to be very rowdy, they're going to try and break up the meeting, and all you've got to do is just make sure that you maintain law and order. And it was through that I learned the importance and the value of the microphone, because it was a microphone that I realised what one can do with the power of a microphone. And I mean, it was just standing room in the Great Hall, and there I was on the stage, and I had that instruction in mind, just be firm. And all I did was I just raised my voice, and you shout on a microphone, your voice bellows and goes through. And it was amazing how I kept absolute law and order there, despite the fact that everybody came to break up I wouldn't say everybody, but that there was a big contingency that were there to break up the meeting. And that it ended in an orderly fashion. In fact, it ended up so well that I got approached by the Debating Society to say that they were so impressed the way I handled it. Would I come and chair their AGM that was taking place the following week? But I declined with thanks.
And the resolution at the end, I think the university remained affiliated.
Well, so then what happened, so the next day was the election, and the voting closed, I can't remember, it was 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock that night. And there was at that time there was always just one voting booth open, that was the one in the Great Hall. And I went up to go and close it, and there was tremendous amount of interest. I mean, we didn't have television in South Africa in those days, but the BBC were there, and there were some other television studios, etc., that were all there. You know, they all follow me. We go up to go and close it, and I take the ballot box, and I hold it in my hand, and suddenly I hear people screaming, "Bomb, bomb!" And I'm holding the box, and the next thing I see smoke coming out of the ballot box.
Wow.
And there's suddenly a sizzling sound. And I look at this thing, and my first reaction was, well, just throw it and run. And I thought to myself, well, if I throw it, maybe it's going to set it off. And if I don't throw it and put it down quietly, it might be a better idea. So that's what I did. I put the thing down quietly, and then I sort of ran. Anyhow, the thing just sizzled and came to an end. Anyhow, what had happened, one of the students, it was Dave Barnard, he was at Res. He came from Coxstad, a Jewish student. He had put his cigarette into his ballot box, and the inside of the box had been varnished. So it started smouldering. Eventually, when I picked it up, it probably sort of caused a bit of agitation, and that caused the varnish to suddenly catch a light, and that caused that whole sensation to happen. So as a result of that, in those days, I made international headlines.
Wow, so this was captured on BBC.
They were there. I mean, there must have been a whole lot of overseas newspapers, BBC, and I can't remember which other television stations were there as well. So that was my introduction to the world stage. end of the result was that New South won the referendum hands down. But coming back to what I mentioned earlier about the engineering students being the conservative bloc, what was very interesting, and it also taught me a wonderful political lesson, that when it comes to politics, you can't fool all the people all the time, because people aren't that stupid. And we had a system proportional voting, so there were 15 people that you had to vote for, and you had to vote in order, starting from your favourite down to number 15. And what was very interesting when it came to voting in the engineering block, one year it was the engineering student who was put up was a chap by the name of Fats Greenberg, and the person who was sort of favourite to take the polls and to be the leading get the most votes in that election was Robin Marga. And what was unbelievable was in that engineering block, every vote was 1 and 2 was either Marga Greenberg or Greenberg Marga, which showed that even if people had that conservative outlook, they were prepared to admire and respect a liberal person who they felt had the ability to lead. And Robin certainly did have that ability to lead, which he did very well. So that was, I found that a wonderful lesson. And I think when it comes to sort of general politics, if people would just remember that if you've got a strong candidate, you've always got a good chance. I mean, in that system of proportional voting, it'll always come into play. If you don't have proportional voting, obviously it's winner takes all, which is, you can argue sometimes that it shouldn't be that way. But those were really some good years. I mean, one story where I got away with murder as being the electoral officer. Bits won the InterVarsity against Tux one year, and that night in the Great Hall, in the exams, I think it was called the exams room, whatever it was, upstairs, they had a social dance. Anyhow, tickets was cost 5 or 10 rand a ticket, which is a lot of money in those days. And anyhow, Bits won, and it was great excitement, everything. We get there, we had our tickets, and they locked up the Great Hall. They wouldn't let anybody in. They said it was full. And I mean, having spent 10 rand, and now you're not going to get 10 rand back. You know, you're not a happy chappy. So I'll never forget it. So very innocently, I was standing there by the plate glass door, and I took my foot and I kicked. I said, I'm Alan Mentor. He was a hero that day for Bits, and I kicked, and the next thing my foot went straight through the plate glass door. What sobered me up very quickly was the arrival of these Alsatian dogs. So I stood back, and I didn't know what to do, anything, but I sort of became incognito as fast as I could. You know, because of that, they opened the doors and they allowed everybody tickets to still to come in. So that was Saturday night. Comes Monday, I get a call from the registrar Stondemacher. I was in the SRC office, and he says, I'm just phoning you. I've got a funny report that you were the person who kicked in the door in the Great Hall. And I thought quickly, if I wouldn't have done it, nobody would have ever seen 1 cent back. He wouldn't have got in, and that would have been that. So quietly I said to him, no, it wasn't me. So he said, I thought it couldn't be you. You're too responsible. He said it must have been, they said it was Raymond Stein who they thought was with me. Well, I want to tell you, I got hold of Raymond Stein quicker than you could believe. I said, Raymond, anybody contacts you, you know nothing about it. You were around, but you didn't see, you didn't know what happened.
So we're very lucky in those days didn't have security cameras or any video footage.
But that story just sort of came to mind now. But so those were sort of very interesting days at Wits. I mean,
And your experience at Wits was very positive.
look, when I say positive, when it came to let's call it alcohol intake, I think I would have got a first. We used to go now, excluding the first 6 months, but thereafter, 11 o'clock every morning, I think I mentioned this to you before, we used to be at the Devonshire when it used to open. In those days, the Dev had the privilege, or the record, or whatever you want to call it, of being the pub that had the highest beer consumption of any pub in South Africa.
Amazing.
And what was also nice was, it happened a few times. We would, when SAB would prepare any advertising, they would, we were regulars there, so we would be invited to come along. We had a sign and undertaking that they could use any photographs in any state that we were in, and that we would have no claim or anything against them for anything. And it was drinks on the house, beer, it was just beer at that point, that when they did the take. And afterwards we could have drinks for as much as we wanted to for the rest of the day. But I think all of us all stuck to beer, and it was really great. It was also nice to be acknowledged by SAB for that. So that was part and parcel, of the fun. But it was. I would imagine that students today, I think they have pubs on campus. It's not the same as it was then. As I say, we would be there at opening time, and I doubt if we were still there at closing time. That would have been impossible.
But you still managed to graduate?
I still managed. I don't know how, but I did. So those were really great days. And there were interesting people that used to come there every day. Amongst them were judges and engineers and lawyers and people who sort of really got to the top. We were really a happy crowd.
And Lionel, can I ask, at Wits, you never ever felt any anti-Semitism or discrimination? Or?
I'll be honest, never. I never came across that at all.
I think that's the one distinction of Wits, even when I was there, that there was total respect for one's religion, and you just felt it was an island in a safe place.
What I also found nice was that you were able to sit there outside on the library lawns, and you were able to have debate things with people, without it becoming, without any fighting occurring. And at the end, there wouldn't be anybody to adjudicate it, but you would.
The freedom to express your opinion.
No, that was really, those were really, really great days. I'm not here today to tell you about all the escapades and other stories, although my greatest story, I might as well tell you, at Wits, was the day we ended up locked up in Marshall Square.
Wow.
That to me was my highlight. There was no better day. What happened was, I was in a lecture early in the morning, and they said, "Stunt, do you want to take part?" So I said, "Sure." So what had happened was, we were going to have a mock hanging, corner Commissioner and Elof Street, outside I think it was the Colosseum or His Majesty's.
This is for RAG?
Yeah, for RAG. So what they had arranged was they had this truck, and on the truck they had a gallows set up. Now, and it was really, the whole thing was done really realistically. But what they did was, the person that they were hanging, they actually he was being held up by a corset around his body, and the actual noose around his neck was a false rope. But you couldn't tell that from wherever you were looking.
Wow.
And anyhow, we go along, we dressed up in all medieval clothing, so we were wearing sort of, what do you call it, so we were wearing sacks, and we get on the truck, and there were a few people who were the chaplains, so they were dressed in
Wow.
sort of religious garb, and included amongst the crowd that were on the float was Ralph Simon. Now, Ralph went on to Hollywood, where he did very well as a music director, and he had at the time the latest in hi-fi equipment. So we have this all on the float, and we go off, and he's announcing to everybody that we're going to have this well, it's not a mock hanging, this is a real hanging. We're having the hanging. And we're sort of going into town, Loveday Street, across the Queen Elizabeth Bridge into town. Loveday and Bree was the traffic department headquarters. Funny enough, he was Jewish. Savile Binder was the chief of traffic police in those days. And now you must remember that with this whole hi-fi set of his, it was against all the buildings. It was just echoing from one building to the next.
This is in the heart of downtown.
Yeah, so even if you were deaf, you would hear you knew that something was happening. So we go past several Binders, several Dorfman's office, and announcing this. And we get to Bree Street, and as we're going on Bree Street, just coming to Elof, some traffic cops come, we know what's going on. We tell them, okay, we'll escort you. Wonderful, this is cooperation. You couldn't wish for anything better. So we're going along Elof Street, and just before we get to Commissioner Street, where we were going to have it, we were going to cross over Commissioner Street. Suddenly cops in every form, coming on motorbikes, motor cars, tow trucks, you name it, on foot. They just appeared. The word had already got out from several Dorfman that everybody must get to the scene, that there's chaos going on, and stop it. So we're on the back there. So the robot turns green, we're going to cross over Commissioner Street, and suddenly one cop stops the driver. Now, just to give you a bit more information, it was a black driver, and the people whose truck it belonged to, their name was Parrot, P-A-R-R-O-T. So now, we were the two brothers, and they were sitting in the front of the truck. So they come, and the cop whatever happened caused the truck to stall. Well, while it stalls, the cop now gets clever and he pulls the key out of the truck.
Wow.
So we're now in the middle of Commissioner Street, in Elof, and we can't carry on. There's a cop car that suddenly comes and parks right in front of us. So we all really sort of stuck there. Now the cop was saying, move on, can't move on, he's got no keys. So he said, if you don't move, I'm going to arrest you. So he tries to arrest him. So on the one hand, you get the two Parrot brothers pull the driver away from the cop. You've got the cop trying to arrest him. Next thing you've got all this. You would literally must have been 3,000-4,000 people that were actually watching this whole incident.
Wow.
Now I actually we had photographs of all this. Unfortunately, when I moved, I lost those photographs. But it was a scene to behold.
I'm sure this must have been published in the paper.
Oh, sure, it was published. So you had then you had the students pulling the cops, and then the cops became a tug of war going on. So in the scuffle, the one cop lost his watch, and while this was going on, somebody stole the key out of the traffic department car. So I'll come back to that just now. So in the meantime, there's absolute chaos going on there, because now traffic's come to an absolute halt in the centre.
In the busy street.
And you've got every traffic cop is there, and they're all involved in the skirmish. So a couple of chaps get off the truck and they start directing the traffic.
Wow, because Commissioner Street is the busiest street.
Yeah, and Elof is the main street.
Yeah.
So anyhow, so while this is going on, we carry on with the hanging, and we finish the hanging, and suddenly things seem to get a little bit quieter and organised. The next thing, there's a bit of chaos because now they can't get that cop car in front of us, they can't move that, they've got no keys for that. So you know, they come and they, eventually they get that car, they tow it away. Then they come to tow us away. I thought, oh no, this is great, this is real friendship, we've now made peace. They understand that it's all about charity, and now they taking us, because we've got no other way of starting the truck, they're going to take us wherever we're going. So great. Little do we know they're taking us to Marshall Square.
Wow.
We get to Marshall Square, a couple of chaps in their sacks and all that, sort of hitching back to university. And they get lifts and they get back. In the meantime, we told everybody off the truck, you're all under arrest.
Right.
What we under arrest for? Theft. What theft? 2 charges. One was a cop lost his watch, and the second one was a theft of keys from the police car. Now, keys from the police car, afterwards found out, and what happened was that Jacob Hirschman was there, and he saw it, and he couldn't resist taking it. When he realised what he had done, he just took it and he threw it down the drain.
Oi. Sure.
So now we've got these 2 heavy charges against us,
Wow.
So we taken, we locked up in the cells. I must say, for a while they brought some hardened criminals in with us, and then they took them out. Now the rest of the afternoon was, it was an absolute joke. I told you that we had the 2 Parrott brothers who were with us. Then we had Lawrence Parrott. He became an advocate afterwards. He was with us. So they couldn't, between Barrett and Parrott, they got so confused, they didn't know what was going on. They were doing roll calls all the time. They couldn't get the numbers to match or to sort out, and it was, absolute chaos. Anyhow, eventually calm restores, okay, we're prepared to charge you with disturbing the peace. Now in the meantime, by the way, they've been trying to phone the RAG committee to tell them what was going on. They couldn't get through because Savile Dorfman had spent over 2 hours on the phone with the RAG committee telling them that he's cancelling RAG. And
So loud for our listeners, RAG was it was a carnival atmosphere.
it was a carnival for raising charity, raising funds for charity.
And you had all floats, all
It
different
was all a
motifs,
fun day. So this Savile Dorfman is now cancelled.
And they cancelled the RAG day?
No, they didn't.
Because RAG was one of the highlights of the calendar.
So they didn't cancel it. But in the meantime, he was more than threatening. Because if you knew Savile Dorfman, his son was Malcolm was his son.
He was a karate expert.
Yeah.
And I did karate with Malcolm Dorfman.
Yeah. So
he was together one time with Stan Schmidt. They were the karate experts in South Africa.
Yeah. So anyhow, so eventually these chaps get back to university and were hitched, and eventually they also get through to the RAG committee. Dougie Smolin was the chairman. So Dougie gets the call and he finds out what's going on. So, but in the meantime, they said, okay, we'll charge you R4 each admission of guilt for disturbing the peace. So for some reason I had a lot of money on me that day. I had about 80, 90 rand on me. So that did really get quite a lot of us out. We were between 30 and 40 people that were there. So in the meantime also what happened was that there was a black driver, and so they turned around and said, now what's going to happen to the black driver? So I'll never forget, the cop turns around and he says, look, you're going to all have to chop white stones and he's going to chop black stones. So anyhow, so everything is now sorted out. They've taken us out of the cell, they've got us in a big room there, and they've now got the names sorted out, they've got the Barretts and Parrotts sorted out, and everything is just about to get, we've got over 20 of us out, and then we were going to go and get money to get the rest out. Meantime, one of the kids had phoned his father, and his father got hold of his lawyer, Harry Goss. So Harry Goss arrives there, and now it's already decided we're paying admission of guilt. He says, nobody in this room is guilty. You're all innocent. No one's paying any admission of guilt. This is his opening comments. Now, you know, we're university students, we're democratic, we go with majority rule, so we put it to the vote. So the vote goes that we're all innocent and we're not going to pay any admission of guilt. So this again starts a whole turmoil and everything. In the meantime, Dougie Smolin arrives and he brings with him Alan Levine as the attorney. I don't know if you knew Alan. Now they both played rugby for Transvaal,
Wow.
Dougie and Alan. And anyhow, so the cops briefed them, you know, what had happened and that we'd reached a settlement and that we now, Harry Goss walked in and stopped it. So Alan Levine walks in there, into the room, takes his hand as if though he's on the rugby field, and he physically pushes Harry Goss aside and he looks him straight in the face. He says, I don't care what anybody else in this room says, we're paying your admissions of guilt and we're getting you to the other side, each and every one of you.
Wow.
But by then it had gone up from 4 Rand to 6 Rand. And with that, we got a long lecture, you know, this is all charity money that has been paid to get us out, and everybody must please, you know, pay back their portion of it. But we took a decision amongst ourselves that the amount of publicity that we got them that day
Was
it
invaluable. Yeah.
So now we got back to university.
But there was no criminal record or anything?
No.
It's
Just an ordinary admission of guilt, disturbing the peace. But that was certainly, as I say, was without a doubt my greatest day at university. So,
and this made the papers?
Sure, it was the headlines. I mean, it was, and it's a pity I had all these photographs, and that was, they were interesting because you could see how many people were there, the roads, how they were blocked, how people standing in all the buildings, every window, people were looking out to see what was going on. I mean, I don't remember the other people, you know, I'll have to think about it, but I mean, I remember there was one girl who was at the giant plane, and I don't know, there were just so many other people, but those are the Barretts and Parrott I certainly remember.
What a story.
And Ralph Simon, obviously. So that was that. And then, after university, I kept politics very much as a hobby. I kept my finger on fire, what was going on, what was happening, what was really going on within politics. And it was interesting days.
But you must have made incredible connections.
No, look, I certainly did at university.
Yeah.
But what I found very interesting was I analysed the situation differently to other people. I don't know if you remember the Basil de Oliveira incident.
So Basil de Oliveira was a coloured cricket player.
Right.
And I think he was playing in England. And
yeah, played for Worcestershire, and he was selected
They
for
were
the
invited
MCC,
to come and play in South Africa, and South Africa asked the British not to include him into the team.
Yeah, that's correct. And that caused that whole furor, and I think the tour was cancelled on account of that whole incident. Shortly after that, suddenly there was a break in policy, where suddenly they started making certain concessions where blacks, people of colour were allowed to take part in sport. They were called international events. Mm-hmm. And I've learned one thing: once there's a crack, you'll never close the crack. And I mean, that's why Albert Herzog, when he was Minister of Posts and Telegraphs and in government, he would never allow television to come to South Africa, because he knew that that would be the one instrument that would change the whole face of South African society. And in the end he proved to be 100% correct.
He was, because there was such, the censorship was
Yeah.
so great. I mean, we only got television in South Africa in about 1977.
No, it was before. I'll tell you, we had test runs already in 75.
75 hours on a pan, but it really started in when I came back, 76, 77.
That was, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the first things that ever appeared on television was that incident with the Israeli consulate. That's a story for another day. And
Were you involved in that incident?
No. I was at university, but one of the funny stories of that, Sully Sachs tells it, because it happened outside. I mean, his shop was right there where it all happened.
It was right. He
And
had
he was-
snap print. I think
yeah.
he had snap print.
And he was right
near
out-
Commissioner Street.
No, he wasn't in Commissioner.
Very nearby, I think.
Yeah, right around the corner, but right where the consulate was. And so Sully was obviously he was in the middle of everything that was going on. And General van den Berge was the chief of security police, was there with Jimmy Kruger, the Minister of Police, and everything. Anyhow, they now decided they were going to spray tear gas. But nobody bothered to look which way the wind was blowing. And they sprayed it. And the next thing, Jimmy Kruger and General van den Berg had to run for cover because they were the ones that got hit.
That was a very interesting thing. Lionel, could you tell our listeners what happened just briefly in that?
Very briefly, what happened was that it was a neighbour of my late wife Diane, David Protter. Yeah, he was working as a security guard in the Israeli consulate, and he had come to them with a whole lot of suggestions and ideas and things, and for some reason, nobody took any notice or concern of what he was saying. So unfortunately, he decided to just to show them exactly how weak their system was. Whatever. I can't remember exactly what the whole motivation was, but what he did was he staged an attack from within the consulate. He staged this attack, and unfortunately, a couple of lives were lost in it, very tragically.
It was very tragic.
And I mean, at that point, until people realised that it was an inside job, everybody imagined that it was, at the time, it was a Black September group of organisations of that nature that were involved in it. And it took almost the whole day till they were able to get David Protter to surrender. And I must say one thing, David Protter, after he was released from prison, he was in the 95 with all the amnesties that were granted. David got out of prison much sooner than he should have, and I must say he moved down to Tsenin, where he set up a security and ambulance service, which I remember watching on television, where they once showed what he was doing there, and it was most incredible. He really was really doing a very, very good job down there. It was his own company that he had.
In Tsenin, that's in the northern Transvaal.
Yeah. So that was, but as I say, unfortunately, in that incident, a few lives were lost.
Totally unnecessary.
But so coming back, subsequent to that, after that Basil de Oliveira incident, I said to myself, there are two ways of change coming to South Africa. The one way is Helen Suzman way, the Progressive Party, which is going to be revolutionary. Overnight everything will happen. Or it's got to be evolutionary, where it's going to take a bit of time. And I myself saw that if they tried to do it quickly, or the revolutionary way, that if anything, that in itself would cause a revolution. But with the coming at that time of television, and with suddenly people getting a view into the outside world, and what was going on in Namibia and Southwest Africa at the time, people suddenly started realising that it just wasn't a battle worth fighting, and that first and foremost it was worth giving up Southwest Africa, which then became known as Namibia. In fact, from that, my father was very friendly with the administrator of Southwest Africa, Professor Potgieter. And I remember we went to his farm one day, and we met with him. He had a farm near Warmbaths, called Bella Bella. And sort of chatting along there. And I remember Professor Potgieter telling us, he said, you know, I would often get important visitors coming to me, and they would ask me what if I would bring them up to date with the political situation. And I always said to them, okay, I'll do that, but come with me. We got into a car and we drove, and we found the moment we would see some people sitting under a tree, I'd stop the car, I'd get out, and I'd say, okay, now ask your questions. And we'd have a translator with, and he said, now you'll get your answers. He said, because if you want to know answers to political questions, ask people at the ground level. They're the ones who can tell you. Don't ask politicians, because they'll tell you what they want to tell you.
So true. What a insight.
No. And I mean, I learned a lot from that. And I just saw that South Africa changes were going to come. Were going to come quickly. I mean, in '85, at the time of the Rubicon speech, that's when there should have been, the change should have come very fast. I mean, it did come very fast soon after that. I mean, by '89, I mean, it was really in full momentum. That was when P.W. Botha, after he had his stroke, when he was sort of forced to resign as leader of the Nationalist Party.
Yep. F.W. de Klerk.
Yeah, F.W. de Klerk took over, and that was the sort of the beginning of all the changes that took place, and it took place sort of pretty quickly.
It's true. You had the unbanning of the ANC, you had the Communist Party also, you had Joe Slovo coming back.
Those were very traumatic and interesting days. And what was interesting to people who thought that the earth would open up, it didn't open up. Life just carried on.
Lionel, can I mention something? And I think our listeners, I'll never forget, on 702 they interviewed Joe Slovo when he just came back to South Africa. And growing up, we had always thought of Joe Slovo as enemy number one, that he's this ogre, this terrible person, and he was here on 702, which was an independent radio station, and they interviewed him. And when you heard him speak for the first time, he sounded like a normal person, and what he said, you might disagree or agree with his views, but he was very articulate in what he said, and it made a lot of sense. And this image that you have, because of the banning, and because you weren't allowed to hear other views, it started falling away, just as you said. When you open up and you're exposed to different views, it changes people's interpretation of what's happening.
Look, no, without a doubt, I mean, you say Joe Slovo, I mean, he together with Nelson Mandela really brought about a peaceful transition. There's no doubt about it. The role that he played was such that he was always able to bring moderate viewpoints to what was going on.
People expected the worst, that he was this...
I mean, I had him, my impression of Joe Slovo was that he was definitely, you couldn't get worse than him.
And he turned out to be, he saved the situation. He played a major role in bringing a democratic change to the country.
Because there were two people, Joe Slovo and Chris Hani. Those are the two people that I regret so much not ever having met. I actually had the opportunity of meeting Chris Hani, and had a wonderful introduction to him. And I postponed it. Unfortunately, these are things you should never postpone, because then it was too late after.
He was assassinated.
Yeah. And one always had the impression that a person like Chris Hani was, that he was just there to bring about total destruction. And yet people don't realise that it's really the opposite. And between the Slovo-Mandela formula of going for a solution and not looking for creating a bigger problem, that we actually ended up getting the solution that we got. I mean, obviously it took more than just, it took F.W. de Klerk, some brinkmanship to also to help bring it about. I mean, it never would have happened without him playing some very important and crucial card tricks just at the right time. I mean, he was shrewd enough and savvy enough to have got Andre Strenich as the one to help bring about to propose ending the Immorality Act and the Group Areas Act. Now, I mean, that took some very, very clever manoeuvring.
That's true.
And
And they did away with the pass laws,
and everything. I mean, all those changes. And it was interesting because I had the opportunity where I became very close to a lot of the politicians, nationalist politicians in particular, and the ones that I met with were all the verlichte, the ones that were wanting change, but were being held back. Now, FW had a very simple philosophy. His philosophy was that when you're part of an organisation, you must stick to the rules of the organisation. If you want to change the rules, become the leader of the organisation, then you can change it. And that's exactly what he did. You know, it's and he did it very cleverly. I mean, I know for a fact that the moment he took over as leader of the Nationalist Party, before he took over as leader of the country, what he did was he actually really started getting teams together to go and start preparing government and quasi-government for change.
They had secret negotiations with Mandela.
That all went on, but he actually was preparing government employees and quasi-government employees to be prepared to accept when change came about, to be able to accept it. Because you must remember, you tell a person you can't park in this bay, you've got to park in the parking bay next to it, you're destroying their lives.
Yeah.
And now he had, in his master plan, he was coming up with a much, much bigger plan than what than what people were ever expecting. And they never expected it to happen within such a short frame of time.
Because it really did happen in a very short.
Fast, okay.
It's a miracle that there was. I remember there was people thought there'd be a civil war. There would be there were
civil war. If you remember how people were buying. I mean, you couldn't get a Yortzeit candle.
It's true. It was, and you know, Alana, I'd just like to mention for our listeners as well. If you take Joe Slovo again, his wife was Ruth First, and she was killed in Mozambique in a letter. They sent a bomb in a letter, and she was killed in Mozambique. And he was quite a remarkable person. He never deviated from his Jewish roots. He was always proud to say that he was Jewish, and he played a remarkable role in the transformation of this country.
And it was most interesting. I mean, also talking about Ruth First, I mean, there was Jeanette Schoon, who I was friendly with at university. Her husband, parcel bomb was meant for her husband, Marius, and she was the one that opened it. And I mean, unfortunately, she was killed instantly by that bomb.
I think Abe Sachs, he lost.
Abe Sachs, yeah. He lost an arm.
So there was a lot of people could have had tremendous animosity and on both sides, and it's a miracle this country the way that the country in '94 how it went democratic and in a very difficult situation.
Look, the only tragedy of it all was that I believe that had Mandela been allowed to carry on running the country, we wouldn't have got into the situation where we got all these sort of, how can I call it, what's the word, well, all these entrepreneurs who suddenly became involved in getting hold of all the, taking control of all the tenders and getting hold of the whole economy.
It was a state capture.
It was more than state capture, and the tragedy of it all was that if it would have been allowed to have evolved, the economy would have been allowed to evolve properly. Sure, there would have been ups and downs, but I don't think we would have taken the downs that we did take, which was a great pity. And I'm not putting any blame on Thabo Mbeki's hands, but he was the one who helped to accelerate that change. But nevertheless, we are where we are, and
but the one thing about Nelson Mandela, by him relinquishing power after the 4 years, was quite unique in Africa, where you have like Robert Mugabe, who stayed he wanted to be as a life president of the country. here you had somebody who, his time, he did his 4 years, and he handed over the reins to...
Yeah, because I'll end off with a story about Nelson Mandela. You know, as I said, for my first 50 years, on my 50th birthday, I remember so clearly. And why do I remember it so clearly? I was under the knife that day with Wolfie Frankel, the surgeon.
On your 50th
On
birthday?
my 50th birthday. I'll never forget, I went to school in the morning and I suddenly developed a pain, and then and there, I'd had that pain before, and I knew exactly, it was almost 30 years previous, the type of pain that you've had it once, I'd actually had it twice before. I knew exactly what it was. I came home, I phoned my doctor, the late Cyril Golden. I said, Cyril, I've got pilonidal sinus. He said, you've got what? I said, I've got pilonidal sinus. Good. How do you know such terms? I said, because I've got it. He said, I'm coming to have a look. You can't have it. Anyhow, he came and within just one look, he said, no, you've got it. And it's what happens in the base of your spine, and an abscess develops of the hair follicle, and it goes up your whole spine. It's the most painful thing that you could wish for. And how they treat it is they've got to operate, and then it's got to, body's just got to heal on its own.
To relieve the pressure.
And not in relief, they've got to get rid of it, and it's got to just heal on its own and make sure that there's no other cavity that can form that can again cause it to reoccur. In my case, it had obviously cavity is sort of created in the hair follicle, found its way there and got infected.
Pilonidal sinus.
Pilonidal sinus. So that was my 50th birthday, but
Shame,
that was 1994. And just after that was the time of the elections in April, and then came the inauguration of Nelson Mandela. And I got an invitation to come to Pickwater's office that overlooked the amphitheatre Union buildings, where you'd have the best view of anybody and everybody. That was all well and good. I can't remember, it was the beginning of the week that the inauguration took place, and I get a call to tell me, look, sorry, security police or military have blocked, won't allow anybody access to Union buildings. Correctly so, because I mean it would make an ideal opportunity if you wanted to shoot anybody there. You couldn't have wished for a better position. So, but they said, look, because of that, how many seats do you want? So I said, I'll come back to you. So I remember asking friends and everybody, and nobody wanted anything. And absolutely, I said to Robert Hansen, I said, you know, you have to get up, you've got to be at Kyalami at 6 o'clock in the morning to get a bus. No, it's not, he doesn't want to come. Nobody wanted to come. So anyhow, went along, I'll never forget, on the bus ride, where was Reverend Bayes Nadir was there. But I remember saying to him, I said, Reverend, he was standing right behind us in the queue waiting to sort of get on the bus. I said, please go ahead. I said, you know, this is your day. And he replied to me, he said, no, it's not my day. He said, this is our day. You go ahead. And I remember on the bus was Johnny Gordon. In those days, cell phones had just come out, and sort of been just a handful of people that had them. Whole bus ride to Pretoria, Johnny Gordon was on the cell phone the whole time.
For Bayes Nadir, Lionel, if you could mention to our listeners, he was an icon. He was Afrikaans, and he was very liberal.
Yes, he was extremely liberal. He was the head of the South African Council of Churches, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And he played a very pivotal role in sort of, first of all, in helping the ANC during the years in the struggle, and certainly played an important role also in the changeover of government.
I remember him giving a talk at Wits University when it was still prior to 94, when I was there, from the late 70s to the middle 80s. And he came and he spoke at the Great Hall, and he was really a very respected, very highly...
yeah, he was.
an incredible person because he came from a very staunch Afrikaans
Yes.
background and he was a very liberal person.
The other name that I remember who was on the bus that day was Ben Turok.
Wow, that's,
You know,
here
can't-
you're talking.
You know,
He was also very, very. He was a very, very. Ben Turok was.
and he played a leading
A
role
leading
in the as an economic advisor to the ANC, and he's still, you know, he still gives his views. I mean, he must be well in his 80s today, but he still makes his views known.
He's Jewish, Ben
Yeah,
Turok.
yeah.
Yeah. So, who did you go with to the inauguration?
Just my wife Diane and myself. So we get there, and we got seats. A section of, well, they weren't the greatest of seats, but as time went on, I noticed there's one section nobody was sitting there. So I said, come, let's go and sit there. So we sat there, and it's literally, I mean, we were 2 meters from the podium.
Wow.
So anyhow, that section was reserved for the American delegation, and they were flying in. Congress was in session, so they left from Congress. They flew straight here, came to the Union Buildings. Straight after Union Buildings, they went back to straight back to America because they had to get back for voting. So we were sitting there. So eventually they arrived. Oh, look, we'll sit here as long as we can until we get kicked out. We weren't kicked out. One thing that amazed me, certain things that I remember from that day was because every time a dignitary would arrive, they would announce it. And I'll never forget the applause that Fidel Castro got when he arrived. I mean, a Springbok rugby team wouldn't have got such an applause
Really?
when he arrived. It was something unbelievable. But anyhow, sitting there, and the American delegation arrived, and there were 2 Democrat congresswomen who were sitting near us and chatting to them one another. The next thing somebody said to them, "Would you like to meet Yasser Arafat?" And with that, they jumped up and they were gone.
Wow.
But it was a meeting of anybody and everybody that they were all.
Is the Weizmann came from Israel?
I can't remember who was there from Israel. That I don't remember.
I think he was
But that day was highlighted by late Chief Rabbi Cyril Harris, because his speech was something that sort of brought, I think it brought the Jewish community to an absolute apex on such a special day. I mean, he spoke brilliantly, and he did it with dignity and with charm as only he could do it. It was something that was, and there we were sitting no more than
You must be very proud to have
2-3
heard-
meters. I think every Jew was absolutely proud of him that day. It was, you couldn't help but be proud. I mean, people who were there, not only were there, but the whole country was talking about what he did for the community that day.
But he had a very special connection with Nelson Mandela.
Yeah. And
Before Nelson Mandela married
well, I remember talking about that. His marriage to Gloria Michelle.
Michelle, yeah.
That was, I think they got married on the Saturday.
He had mentioned it to the Chief Rabbi before and
Yeah.
asked him for his blessing.
So what happened was that Saturday I was actually at Chief Rabbi Harris's house. He had, I'm just trying to remember now, but I think he had now moved to Highlands North from Parktown. So we were there, and he was telling us a story about the wedding and how he had been to give his blessings because of Shabbos. And it was most interesting that the fact that I was there with the Sow and Seagull at Shabbos. I mean, we went there I told you the previous story, I told you the connection to Chief Rabbi Cyril Harris. And it was most interesting, him just telling us what, I can't remember exactly now, but he told us exactly the message that he gave to Nelson Mandela and to Gloria Michelle for as his wedding drosha. But unfortunately, I don't remember it.
But he had a very close and a very special connection with Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, no, he certainly did.
And he did the community very proud at the inauguration. And Lionel, it was such an honor for you to be there.
No, it was absolutely, I mean, it was something. What was also interesting that day, they had kosher food, they had everything was there. But, I mean, we weren't amongst the eating of the dignitaries, but we were standing outside the tent where food was and everything. And the next thing, right next to me, you should pitch up with Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands and,
Wow.
and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. And for about 10-15 minutes they were standing right there talking. They wanted to get away from the mad crowd. They were standing right next to us, and they were talking, and it was, I always imagined Prince Philip to be tall. I always saw him as tall. But, came to me, it was quite a surprise to see how short he was. I suppose age had caught up on him as well. Although, I mean, he was then wasn't that old then. He was not even my age, 25 years ago.
So Lionel, if you think about it, your journey from Petersburg to Pretoria, from a little boy growing up in Petersburg, in northern Transvaal.
That reminds me of another story. Pretoria reminds me of another story I wanted to just mention. It goes back to 1958. Sorry.
That truly is fascinating.
So going back to, sorry about that, going back to 1958, this was in Petersburg. We, at the time, Moshe Dayan came out to South Africa, and included in his itinerary was a visit to Petersburg. So what he did is that he went on for the weekend, he went to spend with John Schlesinger at the Zebedee Citrus Estates. It's about 30 miles from Petersburg. And it was arranged that Israel Dunsky was then the chairman of the Zionist Federation. He was going to fly to Petersburg that Sunday and have a lunch with the community in Petersburg. And then they were flying on to Bulawayo in Rhodesia. So my parents were away that weekend. I was staying with my cousin David Hirschman. And it was arranged that they would go out to the airport. A few of the leaders of the community would go out to the airport to meet Israel Dunsky, and then they would drive. They found a point where they were going to go and meet with Moshe Dayan coming from Zebedee. So we go out to the airport, and Dunsky arrives, and you know what Balabatim are like. They've got to share the high, we've got to share the high moments of everything. And then what happened was, excuse me, they suddenly decided, look, we better go off and meet, get to the meeting point with Dayan and get there before he gets there. So they turned around to Jack Hirschman. They said, you stay, wait for the pilot, and we'll meet you back at the hall for lunch. All great, all well and good. So they're in their cars and they're gone. Now, remember, this is a small little airport, nothing big about it or fancy. Although it was a military airport during the war. The next thing we see a fancy plane flying overhead and coming into land. So David and myself go out to go and have a look at this plane. It lands, really, really fancy. I mean, in Petersburg you never saw anything like this. And open the door, and there's a chap with an eye patch on his eye. So I turned over and said, what a coincidence. I said, Moshe Dayan is coming today, and he has somebody else coming with an eye patch. So Dave said, no. He starts stuttering. He said, "No, that's Moshe Dayan."
Sure. Wow.
So we ran into the room there where the pilot was filling out his flight plans for Rhodesia. We said to him, "You better come, Moshe Dayan is here." Because if we wouldn't have been there, there would have been no one there to meet him.
Wow.
And it was, to me, that was a highlight of one of my highlights of my youth, being there. And
So you met Moshe Dayan?
I went there, but we were like, ended up in the official delegation
Welcome
meeting
committee to meet Moshe
in the
Dayan.
meantime. So we go back to the hall with Moshe Dayan, and some people had to go out to the meeting place to go and tell them that they better come back. Moshe Dayan's already there.
Amazing, sure. Oh, that is really quite amazing.
You know, when I think back to that incident, you know, because at that time, when there wasn't a greater hero in the Jewish world than Moshe Dayan.
He was a world celebrity.
Yeah.
He was, yeah.
And that was, so you know, that in brief was my background to my first 50 years. Just a few masterclass, a few stories, a few facts, a few laughs, and you know, as I say, next time maybe we'll carry on from 94 to where we are today.
Well, Lionel, I just want to mention, you know, from hearing your amazing stories, just life-changing and such inspirational stories, you were at the right place at the right time, and that you stayed in the airport just with Moshe Dayan, that you were really there at the right time at the right place, and how a little boy from the northern Transvaal, look what happened, where you ended up going to Pretoria to be at the inauguration of President Mandela, mingling with world leaders, with royalty. And you are our royalty. Lionel, you really are. You were the right person to, in a way, represent the Jewish community that you were invited there. It's really, you're a very special, unique individual, and the whole community can be very proud of you. What you've achieved in your own way, you really are inspiration for all of us, somebody we all can strive to emulate. So I really want to thank you so much for this wonderful time together, for sharing your past with us, which is so insightful and so wonderful. And really, you are really an example for all of us to, please God, emulate and strive for. So just want to wish you all of Hashem's blessings at Mayvesrim, in good health, happiness, and may you just continue your amazing work that you do.
Yes, thank you very much. As I was saying, I left out one point in this journey, which maybe I should have included, but maybe I'll do that as a separate one in more detail when we next meet, and that was my journey with the Southern Seagull. That started way back in 75. So that's a story for another day.
Thank you so much, Lionel. At least the very first time we met, you mentioned with the Southern Seagull how out of all your achievements, I think that stands as the pivotal. That is, I think, your connection with Southern Seagull was so life-changing. And I think out of all, and you've met so many special people and you've done so many special things, but the chesed, the charity that you have extended, and the story of the Southern Seagull, I think that's the highlight. That is your highlight.
And without a doubt, to me, Southern Seagull takes preference over anything and everything else.
That just shows you the type of person you are. So thank God we videoed it on our very first meeting, and we can go into it more. And I really urge our listeners to listen to the very first meeting as well that we had, the first interview that we did, where you spoke so beautifully about your connection with Southern Seagull and how it was life-changing. And we'll do another interview. We'll do many interviews. It's really been an honor and a privilege, Lionel.
No, thank you very much, Liz.
It's a great honor and a privilege to be with you, Lionel. And I thank you so much for your valuable time you've given and for agreeing to do these interviews. And it's been such a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, no, thank you very much. When you first asked me to do it, I didn't know what I was letting myself in for. But really, I've really enjoyed it, and I see the absolute advantage, of having done this, and really to you, I just say thank you very much.
Well, I've enjoyed it tremendously, and I really thank you.
No, that's my pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.